Welcome. This is presentation number 15 in our series Rereading the Fourth Gospel, the story of Jesus the Revealer. And we are making progress, moving through this book. And now in the home stretch, the topic today is the trial of the Revealer. Primarily his trial before Pontius Pilate. We pick up the story in chapter 18. After the 5 chapters that have played out in the setting of the Last Supper, in the farewell discourse, and we have skipped some portions of that, but we'll return to it a little later, so we have not skipped as much as you might suspect at this point. So here at the beginning of chapter 18 we read, "After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples, familiar haunts. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons." And my illustration here from the 16th century is a composite, but this is the Garden of Gethsemane, or the area in the Kidron Valley, and here they come to arrest Jesus, and Judas will betray him with a kiss. He doesn't do that in the Gospel of John. That's in the Synoptics. But here, as we enter these final scenes, final days in the story of Jesus, the Gospel of John and the Synoptics are really quite close, much closer than they are in the previous in other sections of their stories. So there is good sort of parallels. Maybe both the Synoptics and the Fourth Gospel feel that this is where things are really important. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Who are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." The word in Greek is ego eimi. It's just I am. But the translators have chosen to say I am he. If you were to say it, I am, it would be easier to understand the reaction that we have in the text. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them, with the ones who are arresting him. When Jesus said to them, "Ego eimi," or "I am he," as our translator puts it, they stepped back and fell to the ground. But ego eimi is God's self-designation. It's the I am of the Old Testament. And if you were to read it like that, you might almost feel that the people who come to arrest Jesus, they prostrate themselves. It is as though for them too there is a moment of revelation, a sort of shining forth. Some translators have been reluctant to take it to that point, and thus we have I am he for ego eimi. Again he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you, ego eimi, I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those you gave me." So Jesus, even though he is about to be arrested here, he seems to act as the good shepherd, taking care of the sheep, thinking of their good more than of his own. And here we have the scene of his arrest in another depiction, almost 500 years old. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back in its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So there is much here overlap with the synoptics again. And let's just look at the illustration, because here is Peter armed with a sword and a servant, and he manages to cut off his ear. So the synoptics also have the story of the slave of cutting off the ear in the synoptics, and actually one where Jesus heals the slave. And Peter is the one who is doing it, and John is the only one who knows the name of the slave. He's Malchus. Again, to show that the Gospel of John is fond of particulars, fond of details. And then there is awareness of the synoptics. In Gethsemane, Jesus will pray in the synoptics, "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me." There is no Gethsemane story in the Gospel of John, but there is a cup. And we are sort of at the tail end of that. And Jesus has accepted the cup that the Father has given me, because Jesus is still, as we have become convinced, the revealer. So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, and then he will negotiate admittance for Peter as well. And some people, many readers have wondered if the disciple here is the beloved disciple, who is again in sort of paired here with Peter, and who in this account has connections, connections high up in Jerusalem. And that is one reason why some people do not think that John, the son of Zebedee, is the best candidate for the beloved disciple. They think that there must be someone there closer to Jerusalem who has these good connections. It can't be this fisherman from Galilee. We are holding that. It's sort of in the margins for now. We are going to return to that later. So let's look at a map. So where are we now? We are here with the high priest. Here, the house of the high priest here, and that is indisputed. Several maps have that, so that is not an issue here. The issue is really where the Pilate thing is, where the Praetorium is. That is a contested issue, and I hope my second map will not have distorted it. Yeah, so here we have the house of Caiaphas, and then the trial before Pilate will be over here, somewhat over here, and then there will be a long journey, the journey from the Last Supper down to here, to Gethsemane, where Jesus will be arrested on the Friday morning, and then taken here to the house of Caiaphas, right there, and then taken from there to the trial before Pilate, and then to crucifixion here. Now, some of these sites have been identified. Not everything is totally settled. But there is reasonably good correlation with what we know about Jerusalem today and what was the case at that time. Just one short stop for the trial that he has in the before Caiaphas. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. So that's a summary statement. That is not a statement in detail. The trial before Pilate, that's another story. That is a trial in detail. This is more sort of flyover country. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly. See the word parousia there? I have spoken openly, plainly, frankly. I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. And it's almost as though Jesus is here pleading the Fifth Amendment in the U.S. Constitution says that a defendant, someone who is accused or on trial, does not have to testify. They can avoid the risk of self-incrimination by refusing to testify. Well, Jesus is in some ways not willing to testify. He said, you can ask them, because I will say nothing that I have not already said in public, and people know what I say, what I have said. But this is heard as though he is kind of obnoxious. So when he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus in the face, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" So this is Jesus in some ways acting in conventions of contemporary judicial proceedings that may not have been as applicable in those days. In today's proceedings, you are innocent until proven guilty, and you are allowed to testify freely. If something like this happened in a court scene today, at least in most countries where there is the rule of law, that would be quite inappropriate to strike the defendant like that. So anyway, you see that authority, power asserts itself in the face of justice, or in the face of a fair trial, fair proceedings. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters, and we saw a picture on the map here of that, where those locations might be. And again, we have timing. We have it timed. It was early in the morning. And that's a detail that is suggestive, because you have trials. I mean, we have office hours in the world, don't we? We have, from 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, or 4 in the afternoon. Or so the notion that this is early in the morning suggests that this is outside regular hours. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover, which will be that day. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man was not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. That's a kind of in parenthesis here, because it is a remembered comment that is made later, as it were. So here I wrote, this is the U.S. Supreme Court, I think. It's a courthouse. I think it is the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not sure which side of it. But in our time, in our cultures, we have the presumption of innocence, that you can come and be on trial. You are innocent till proven guilty. You have to have presentation of evidence, and until then you are innocent. So here Jesus is presented before Pilate on the presumption of guilt, and on the presumption that their adjudication of his guilt should be sufficient for Pilate just to sign on the dotted line, just sign him off. And then suddenly it dawns on Pilate that this is going to be a capital case, capital punishment, and the games changes, the stakes, that raises the stakes. So now I'd like to propose that in this story, it's important to see where we are. Are we on the inside of the building, or are we on the outside of the building? Because there is a sort of intimacy, a sort of privacy, sort of protected space on the inside. And there is a public space on the outside. And what happens on the inside and what happens on the outside are very different scenarios, very different settings. And there is another inside and another outside that we will look at in a minute. We will discover it when we get to it. So now the trial of Jesus proper begins in the Gospel of John. And we are on the inside. We are inside the building. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's the question. So Pilate has jumped into the thick of it on a question that would be relevant to Roman judicial proceedings. Because if someone claims to be king, that is politically toxic in the eyes of the Romans. Jesus answered, and I would love to have a live audience to ask you, what do you think he will answer? And I will propose that even if I gave you an hour, or a day, or a week, or a month, or a year, you would not have expected the answer Jesus will give. Let's look. Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me? Now, that was not expected. That is not exactly an answer to the question. That is turning things around. How did he do that? So let's move out some of these other things and look at what happens here. The tables turn. Jesus takes command. He is now the one asking questions. Jesus takes command. He puts Pilate in the defendant's dock. The accused questions the judge. The defendant questions his judge or his prosecutor. And we also move from the territory of public opinion to the territory of personal conviction. Do you ask this of your own? That is the territory of personal conviction. Or did others tell you about me? That is the territory of public opinion. there is an outside and an inside, not only of buildings, but of human lives. Let me see if I have that here. Inside now, not just inside the building, but inside the person is now the territory of conviction, even of conscience. When Jesus says, do you ask this of your own? He might just unlock that most secret of spaces in a person's life, the space of conscience. So let's read on. And let's see, did we? Yes. So here we have another depiction of Pilate and Jesus on trial. And of course there is a power discrepancy because Jesus is bound. And being bound or being caged, as you can see, I have witnessed, and my daughter, who is a lawyer, she has also been present in person in trials in Cairo, where the defendant is caged. But when you are caged, you are not presumed innocent. You are presumed to be guilty and dangerous. So there is a disadvantage, even a legal disadvantage, to presenting a prisoner bound and caged. But that's how it is, and I think our artist has done a good job. There is a conversation. We are on the inside of the building. Pilate replied, I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, you remember the question he had was the kingdom question. Are you the king of the Jews? And so Jesus will now elaborate on that question. My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. So this conversation is still proceeding on Jesus' terms, but so I have called it like this. I say there is a disequilibrium here, an imbalance. Pilate has lost the upper hand. Jesus is kind of probing him, but Pilate is on the defensive, seeking to retake command here, and then he claims incompetence. He claims that he is not, doesn't have the resources, the knowledge, the background to adjudicate, because Jesus is Jewish and there is a Jewish problem here. He claims incompetence. He is Roman, not Jewish. That's why he can't say anything. But Jesus addresses his humanity, not his nationality. He doesn't speak to Pilate in Pilate's capacity of being Roman. He speaks to him in the capacity of being human. It's different. And then a kingdom not of this world is a kingdom that eschews violence, that will not be established by violence. It is not political primarily. It could have political consequences, but whatever its politics, it doesn't use violence. Jesus has said that my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my followers would be fighting for me. And Pilate, your kingdom is of this world. It's built on power. It's built on military power too, and it is a coercive reality. We have Duccio here in his representation of the trial, and Jesus before Pilate here. I think this is well done. It sort of preserves the inside feeling, the kind of intimacy, the personal exchange of this encounter. So you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And we wonder if we are making progress, if somehow Pilate's defenses are yielding, if he's sort of about to give in, or to strangeness of this early morning trial at such an exceptional hour. So let's look at what we have. Is Pilate on the move, feeling the stirrings of resonance in himself, revelation that resonates on the inside of a person? Is that what is happening? Is he, as it were, of the truth? Because Jesus says that those who belong to the truth listen to my voice. That's a claim made. It is an assessment of that other person. I came to testify to the truth. Actually, earlier in the farewell discourse, Jesus will say, I am the truth. So here we have big claims, and we have someone put to the test, as it were. A king, yes, I'm sort of a king, but I'm better described as the revealer. A person who knows why he was born and for what he came into the world, to testify to the truth. And here, just to remind you, we have a huge advantage for the rereader, who can know and call upon all those things and actually have a sense of awareness what Jesus means when he says, I have come to testify to the truth. So the conversation continues, and Jesus has put the bar high by saying that everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And Pilate will ask him, and again we have an illustration showing the sort of personal texture, personal tenor of this exchange. Maybe the artist has exaggerated it, but he has in some ways shrunk the distance between Pilate and Jesus. He has in some ways personalized it correctly according to what happens in the Gospel of John. Probably incorrectly in terms of how the sort of physical parameters were in the actual trial. Pilate asked him, what is truth? And you remember Jesus said, I have come to testify to the truth. And now Pilate uses the same word, aletheia, without the article. Truth generalized. In Jesus, truth specified and particularized. And when he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no case against him. And now there is movement from the inside to the outside. So we are inside the building when Pilate asked Jesus what is truth. We are outside the building in the public square when he goes out, in some ways with a preliminary conclusion. He is about to acquit Jesus. But that movement from inside to outside might seem trivial, but it is a movement that isn't trivial with respect to Pilate himself. So let's look at some points we can have here. The distinction between the truth of Jesus and truth of Pilate is vast. Jesus says the truth in relation to a problem, in relation to the lie and the story of the biblical sort of framework. And Pilate's truth is more a philosophical, elusive thing that may not even exist. Jesus, when he says, I have come to testify to the truth, the premise of that claim is that truth exists and truth is knowable. But Pilate's answer is a retreat from that proposition. What is truth? Who knows? Maybe there is none. So Pilate's follow-up question is an evasion. It's not an inquiry. It is a signal of retreat. And the signal of retreat is confirmed physically when Pilate leaves the conversation at that point and moves outside. And here, thanks to the revealer, the person of Jesus in the gospel, the truth. And truth, too, is knowable. So, in our time, the big philosophical question of our time, and for several centuries now, has been epistemology, the science of knowledge. What can we know? What is knowable? That is the big question since the philosopher Immanuel Kant and others little before him and certainly after him, where you cannot know the truth. You can only know what is the truth for you. You cannot know truth in its actuality, in itself. So we live in a world with a very pessimistic epistemology, the unknowability of truth and the truth. And the Gospel of John is not quite so pessimistic, because there is a revealer in the world that makes truth knowable and the truth accessible to us. So here, one more on a psychological sense. When Pilate goes out of the building, he also goes outside, metaphorically. He also goes outside of himself. He leaves his own inner room. He goes from the inside to the outside of his own life. The inside and outside of buildings have a correlation, have a sort of corollary in inside and outside of a person. And there is psychology here in the story, no question about it. So here Pilate is on the outside, and we are in totally different direction now heading in this trial. He talks to people on the outside. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? They shouted in reply, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a bandit. Barabbas was a robber. So in a trial sense, this should be an easy trade. And Jesus is not a robber, And the rereader of the gospel, they know that Jesus himself has contrasted himself to robbers. That the robber comes to steal and I have come to give life. So here we have a big contrast. But we have to see that our expectations of how this trial will turn out will now be cooling off. The hope of a fair trial is over. The bargaining has begun, just to sort of an exit strategy from this. Pilate's goal now is to save Jesus. He will try to do that. I find no case against him. But he also wants to save face. And it's not easy to do both, saving Jesus and saving face. We'll see which one he will want to save the most. His power to pardon and his proposal to trade Jesus and Barabbas, they blow up in his face because they do not accept him. They say, not this man, but Barabbas or Barabbas. And then Pilate's stay on the inside, including his visit to the inside of himself, his own inside, was short-lived. Jesus says, "Come to testify to the truth." Pilate says, "What is truth?" and leaves. He hasn't stayed long enough in that space. Will he ever get back inside the inside of himself? And here, this is a very famous painting by El Greco, and it is called The Disrobing of Jesus. This is not the sort of fully violent assault on him, the flogging and so on. It is the more subtle thing of someone here. Can you see that? Can we see that? Someone here, his hand grasping at the collar of Jesus' robe and about to take it off. So then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. And let me just admit it right away, I am quite skeptical of our ability to depict what was done to Jesus. I do not believe in movies like Mel Gibson's movie about the abuse heaped on Jesus. I do not think it is reproducible, and I am not trying to reproduce it here in my presentation. I'm quite aware of inadequacies in that regard. And then after Jesus is being abused, there was a sort of pedagogical purpose, a strategy behind Pilate doing this. So Pilate went out again with Jesus and said to them, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case in him. He's an innocent man." So Pilate, we ask you, why did you do that to the innocent man? Why did you subject an innocent person to torture, to abuse? So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." And it is the Latin version of that expression that has sort of resonated through the centuries. Ecce homo, behold the man. And here in this depiction, which I think is Tintoretto's depiction of Jesus being brought out and behold the man scene, clearly Pilate intends this to elicit pity. And he is almost pleading, still trying to save Jesus and still trying to save face. It was unjust of him to subject an allegedly innocent man to torture. That's not good court proceedings. That is simply not justice. And behold the man is Pilate's most eloquent statement. He is in some ways, in that moment, an evangelist. Behold the man. Well, behold him. Let's see what we think. And then Pilate tries, this is a subtle one, Pilate tries to get out of his predicament by appealing to sentiments in Jesus' accusers that are lacking in himself. He wants them to be compassionate, but it was not very compassionate of Pilate to subject Jesus to torture. That was a cynical move on his part. His lack of compassion for the prisoner. Now he thinks that there will be compassion for the prisoner on behalf of Jesus' accusers, and it isn't happening. He doesn't get what he wishes for. And here again, Jesus then is innocent, and yet he is condemned. And there is a kind of feeble effort to get him off the hook here. When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him. It's the third time he says it. Jesus is an innocent man. The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he claimed to be the Son of God." And then Pilate has second thoughts. There is a moment of sort of respite or reprieve or calm, a sort of reflective thing here. Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus inside, one-on-one again, "Where are you from?" And again I want to ask my audience, what do you think Jesus will answer this time? And if I give you an hour, or a day, or a week, or a month, or a year, I doubt that we would be able to come up with the answer. But Jesus gave him no answer. That seems to be a great opportunity, doesn't it? Where are you from? Such a broad, inviting question. And Jesus, when he answers, there is nothing. No answer. And we have to see how to put this together. We are back to Jesus' first question. Do you say this of yourself freely? It's not Pilate as a free man or even as a fair judge who now comes to ask Jesus. It is a kind of, he's still retreating, as it were. And Pilate, the all-powerful judge, is afraid. He's fearful in a trial that has gone awry. I say Jesus would have answered if there was more to say, but the revelation has run its course. It ended when Pilate left at the point of truth, the truth and no truth, as it were. And Pilate, he can still move from the inside to the outside of buildings, but the way to his own inside seems in some ways blocked, seems in some ways to be closed. And Jesus is respectful of that. It is not out of obnoxiousness or ill will that Jesus stays silent. It is actually out of respect. And then the trial ends. Here there is a sort of landing it here when Pilate says to him in a threatening posture, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, and I have not put this in yellow here on a purpose, because the sort of resonance of those exchanges earlier is not here anymore. This is sort of just landing it. "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." And here Pilate resumes a posture of power, but we know better. We see the posturing of a weak man here. I don't think there is any doubt about that. And Jesus' judgment is calibrated to mercy. He comforts Pilate. Those who handed you over are more responsible than you are. But he doesn't absolve Pilate. But it's still a sort of gesture of kindness. And yes, we have proof that God did not send his Son into the world in order to judge the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. And wouldn't you know it, Jesus seems to make an attempt to save Pilate. We can say no less than that. And then there is a kind of sudden outbreak of love for Caesar among his accusers. From then on, Pilate tried to release him. He tries still. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And archaeologists actually think that it is possible to locate that area in Jerusalem today. They think there is a sort of little bit of a remains to where he was sitting. And the sudden love of Caesar that you see here, we are doing this because we are loyal citizens. And the rereader or the reader of the gospel, they don't know if they should smile or cry here. After the raising of Lazarus, the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." There is no love of Caesar here. Caesar is the enemy. But here, Caesar is friend. It's an opportunistic thing, obviously. And we read on. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, rubbing it in, open wounds, hypocrisy all over the place. And they cried out, "Away with him, away with him, crucify him." Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." And here again in a close-up of this judgment seat, and my statement here, it's an English proverb, that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. There is a scoundrel texture to this argument, and this love for the emperor, as it were. And patriotism is here. Here we have it in the context of Jewish relations to Romans. But here we have a riot scene in modern times in the name of patriotism and in the name of love of the Constitution. That to me is a distant analogy to what we are seeing, just to make it more recognizable, just to make us more like them, or to help us acknowledge that they are not all that different from us, so we can recognize ourselves in this amazing turn of events here. The notion that Pilate washed his hands is not in the Gospel of John, but it is such an important detail in the story. It's from the Gospel of Matthew, where Pilate will wash his hands, and I thought we should read it. When Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself." And here is an even better one, where the main thing here is to capture the washing, Pilate washing his own hands and claiming innocence. And here we are moving now to the crucifixion. Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to a place went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Here in El Greco's depiction, Jesus is only here, Jesus alone here, without the two others. And so there has been a verdict on Jesus, a verdict in the story. I just wonder what the verdict might be if we consider ourselves as the jury in this trial. What would our verdict be? How would we adjudicate the various participants in this trial? So, let's look at it now in retrospective. The trial motif in the Gospel culminates in an actual trial with a defendant, charges, presentation of evidence, and a verdict. from beginning to end, that is, from the arrest through the proceedings to its conclusion, Jesus conducts himself not as victim, but as God's revealer. This is the cup that the Father has given him. And from the very first encounter with Pilate, the defendant and the judge switch roles. No question about that. And the judgment brought to bear on Pilate is judgment as revelation. So we have confirmation of a thesis we have proposed earlier. And my final point, buildings have an inside and an outside, as we see in Pilate's Praetorium. But humans also have an inside and an outside, and Pilate has one too. There is an inside and an outside.